Well, hello, everyone. I'm going to get us started so we don't waste our precious opportunity. Greetings from 151 Commonwealth Avenue. It is just a delight to see so many of you from across the decades and across the country, and my great pleasure to welcome you to the Merrill Series. I'm Jennifer Borman, head of school, and a Commonwealth alumna from the class of 1981. For those of us who've had the privilege of attending Commonwealth, we know that our education provided an incredible springboard to take our professional lives in whatever directions we chose. And our Merrill Series is an opportunity for us to share some of the inspiring professional work that our alumni undertake, work that is often in the service of others and the greater good. Tonight's speaker is Raphaela Hsu-Flanders, a Commonwealth graduate of the class of 2011, and subsequently a graduate of Reed College with a degree in environmental studies. Since that time, her professional experience has spanned both environmental policy and practice, and their intersection with issues of equity and social justice. She is currently the Renewable Programs Manager for the Bonneville Environmental Foundation. And there she promotes community scale renewable energy for low income and tribal communities across the Northwest. And she is joining us from the Northwest. In keeping with Bonneville's mission of promoting a thriving world where everyone has access to clean water and renewable energy, Raphaela's work is centrally about partnership, participation, and collective impact. I'm also delighted to introduce our moderator, who some of you may recognize if you've attended previous Merrill Series. David Kravitz is a graduate of the class of 1982. He and I overlapped during our time as students at Commonwealth, and I hope that we are both appreciably less awkward now than we were back then. David's own career exemplifies the category-defying breadth of many of our alumni. He is an opera singer trained at the New England Conservatory, and in his spare time, he serves as Deputy Solicitor for the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office. And since our Attorney General has now thrown her hat into the Massachusetts gubernatorial race, David's life may become even more interesting. And now I happily turn things over to David. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that very kind introduction. And thank you to everyone on the Zoom for being here. I'm delighted to be here once again, moderating our Merrill Series conversations with some just really interesting graduates of Commonwealth School, and this is a particularly exciting one, I think. So I just want to dive right in. I'll just give you a little bit more information about Raphaela, and then we'll start talking. So as Jennifer mentioned, she graduated from Commonwealth in 2011. She attended Macalester for 2 years, then took a year, and then graduated ultimately from Reed College in Portland in 2015, majoring in environmental studies. She then worked for the Oregon League of Conservation Voters, where she was working on in electoral politics, trying to elect environmental champions to the Oregon legislature. She did that for about 2 years. She then did policy work on air quality issues with the Oregon Environmental Council. And then from there, she went to where she is right now, which is the Bonneville Environmental Foundation, where she leads the development of and implementation of community scale solar projects throughout the Pacific Northwest, particularly focusing on work with Native American tribes. And so, Raphaela, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, David, Jennifer, and everyone for joining. It's an honor to be here. I remember going to the Merrill Series when I was a student and just haven't set foot in a Commonwealth space in a long time. So it's nice to be here.
So I'm going to start with an easy question. What do you do at BEF? Just tell us a little bit about what these projects are and what your role in them is and how they work.
Absolutely. I'm going to start by sharing some slides and I'll give a brief overview of BEF and then what my team does and then more specifically what I do. Can everyone see those? Awesome. So Bonneville Environmental Foundation, we are a small 501c3 nonprofit. We're based out of Portland, Oregon, but our teams work both nationally, internationally. There's 4 main focus areas within our organization. We have a team focused on watershed restoration projects. We have a team focused on K through 12 renewable energy education. We have a team focused on selling carbon offsets, renewable energy certificates, and water restoration certificates to companies and businesses who are looking to offset their footprint. And then we have our renewables team, which is the team I'm on. There's just 3 of us right now, and we're mostly focused on project development. We work across a few different renewable technologies. Our main focuses right now are solar, electric vehicles, and renewable hydrogen. We have done work in small scale hydro projects before. We've never really worked in wind just due to the scale and the size of our team. But I'll hone in a little bit more on what we do. So we work with numerous stakeholders throughout the Pacific Northwest. Typically to make a project happen, it requires a partnership between us, a utility, a community-based group, or a tribe, or a school district, businesses. Really, we work with a bunch of different stakeholders, and in order to make projects happen, you need not only kind of community champions and community leaders, you also need funding sources. Sometimes that's philanthropic funders, sometimes it's at the federal level or at the state level. And kind of what the cycle of our work, our work is rooted in partnerships. So we'll form a relationship with a tribe or a community group, and we'll assess what their energy needs are. And we'll see kind of, is there interest in solar, renewable energy projects? Some tribes have already completed numerous projects. Some communities are looking into it for the first time. So we try to get a sense of where they're at and what their needs are. And we often say that, our approach is not to show up with an agenda. It's really to just respond to what the stated needs are from the communities themselves. And once we have that, we can help with identifying a site. So sometimes that's just assessing numerous buildings and drafting quick system designs to try to see how much solar we could fit on different buildings or pieces of land. And there's a lot that goes into that, making sure that the roof membrane is new enough, that there's not too much shading. And then we'll kind of, we'll partner with contractors and have them, put together bids where we end up getting an estimated cost for the system. And then we'll help the communities apply for funding. And every project is funded differently. We contribute funds to help make these projects happen, but we also rely on leveraging other funds, and that can come from, again, the federal level, state level. So really, carrying it through. And then once the project's funded, we often try to incorporate workforce development opportunities. So the picture here is actually on the roof of the Quinoa Indonesian project that we did. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But what's happening is that there are some solar contractor professionals on the roof training tribal community members in how to install panels. And so we often try to incorporate workforce development opportunities to plant the seed and encourage those who might be considering careers in solar renewable energy. So then, that kind of takes us to the completion of the installation of the project. And then, we really don't like our work to stop there. We want these to be long-term relationships. Just because you install solar on one building for one community, there's plenty more opportunity. And, it's nice to leverage the momentum that you can create with the project. So we always try to, circle back with our partners and make sure that the system is generating savings and that residents are seeing an impact. So I'll just kind of quickly talk about two example projects just to kind of illustrate more concretely what we do. We had a project that we did this past year with the Blackfeet Nation, which is in central Montana, kind of adjacent to Glacier National Park. And this was the partnership between the community college on the reservation, the K-12 school on the reservation, Grid Alternatives, which is the nation's leading nonprofit solar installer, and they have a very robust tribal program, and then Glacier Electric Cooperative, which is the utility. So it was, again, numerous stakeholders partnering together to make this project happen. We did 4 installations on the community college campus and 1 large community solar project. And I can talk more later about what community solar means. But in a nutshell, community solar is a model where individual residents can actually subscribe to a system that's not on their house, and they essentially own a share of that larger array. So rather than having to be a homeowner or afford the upfront cost of solar, which has often been prohibitive for most low-income communities, you can just subscribe as long as you're in the utility service territory, and then you own basically a share of that array, and you receive the savings on your monthly and annual electricity bills that your share generates. So we did a project in that vein on the K-12 school. And so they were able to subscribe numerous households and families, and now they're receiving savings every month on their electricity bill. And you can see some of the numbers there. Another component that we added in, our renewables team often partners with our team that does K-12 renewable energy education. So especially when we do a project on a school, we like to use that opportunity to engage the STEM educators that are there and try to incorporate renewable energy curriculum and use the installation as a hands-on learning opportunity. So in the photo down below, you can see they're installing the ground-mounted system. That was the community solar system at the K-12 school. And Grid Alternatives had a bunch of their staff leading this workforce development training through. It was, I think, about 4 weeks total during the installation, and both high school and college students from the reservation got to job shadow and learn skills while they were there. So going back to the Quinoa Indonesian project, which I mentioned, this was a much smaller project. It was on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. So located pretty remotely, the reservation is kind of at the end of the transmission line, and they experience pretty frequent power outages. So with this project, what was unique is that we actually included two Tesla power walls, which served as battery backup, which is really important for energy resilience, especially for communities that are remotely located or experiencing frequent outages. So they can bank all the energy that their system generates, especially you can imagine in Washington, it's not sunny all the time. So when it is sunny, the system generates a lot, and you can store that energy in the batteries. And then when it's nighttime or not sunny, the building can rely on the energy saved. So that was a component that we included here. And then we had a similar workforce development opportunity where we had people on the roof getting trained, and a similar engagement with our CE program that was able to work with the school district in the area to incorporate STEM curriculum. And then the other, unrelated to solar, but I'm just going to talk about it for a minute, just to kind of illustrate another opportunity that's been emerging in our programmatic work is I mentioned that we work in electric vehicles and trying to create access to electric vehicle infrastructure and vehicles themselves for communities. So we've been giving out around $200,000 a year in grants to tribal utilities, tribal governments, and consumer-owned utilities for zero-emission vehicle innovation projects, which can mean pretty much any type of innovative project regarding community education, outreach, charging, infrastructure. So we really leave it up to the applicants, but this is another way that we're trying to encourage the adoption of electric vehicles or the adoption of just electric vehicle infrastructure. Sometimes, the proposals have been to install chargers at schools or at public sites. Sometimes it's purchasing a shared electric vehicle that can be used, by numerous people in the community. And I know we probably won't leave it on this slide, but I can send out the slides after if anyone wants my contact info. But I know to get back to David, I'm going to stop screen sharing for now.
Great. Well, thank you. That is amazing. It's a lot of information. I'm curious about a couple of things in what you were just talking about. And one of them is the genesis of a project. How do you find the communities that might be interested? Do you sort of go to them? Do they come to you? Is there some third party involved? Like, how does the initial contact happen?
Great question. People tend to not really know who we are. I worked in the environmental nonprofit world for years, and I never knew who BEF was. So we don't do a lot of marketing or promotion. We don't get a lot of inquiries because of that. So a lot of it comes from relationships that, my boss, who's the director of our renewables team, has been at the organization for 8 years. And he's just had relationships with tribes and other community organizations over the years. A lot of what we do, these projects can take, anywhere between 1 year to 5 years to come to fruition. We often say that it's a long game and that it takes a lot of just repeated conversations and persistence. And sometimes communities don't have the capacity at the moment. Sometimes they're not interested in solar, and that's completely fine. Sometimes 2 years later, you might circle back with them and they are ready to do a project. So, a lot of our projects just come from relationships that we've built over the years. There is a good deal of outreach that all of us do to all the different stakeholders that we work with. I mean, we're always kind of trying to just start conversations with communities and tribes and school districts and utilities, just to kind of gauge, where there might be interest in projects like these and opportunities. And, half the time you strike out, and that's just part of the work.
So you've obviously had an interest in environmental issues for a long time. That's what you majored in, and those are the areas that you worked in before coming to your current job. I'm curious though, before you got to where you are now, did you have any particular experience in solar energy? Did you have any particular experience working with Native American tribes or with communities of that kind? Like how did that sort of end up being the focus of what you do now?
Yeah, definitely it was not a linear journey. I did not have any solar experience whatsoever when I started in this role. I was, I think like a lot of us, I graduated with a very broad liberal arts degree in environmental studies, which means I kind of feel like I dabbled in a lot of things and didn't specialize in anything and was interested in pretty much any environmental issue. So kind of just took the first job that I could get out of college, and pretty much after that, just learned by doing and learned by figuring out what I wasn't thrilled to be doing. It kind of pushed me in a direction. And then once I was in the industry for a few years, I actually found out about this job through a colleague. So, but solar was new to me. I will say I was not wanting to work in electoral politics. I was tired of policy and feeling like in both of those realms, the work was not completely in my control. With campaigning, I didn't even feel like I was really working on the environmental issues themselves. We were pretty removed. We were just working on campaigning and trying to get people elected, which, not to take away from the value of that, but I wanted something more issue-based. And then in, working in policy, it felt like, I know probably a lot of what has happened, what has transpired in Oregon. You could be working for an entire year building constituent support and legislator support for a bill, only to have, the Republicans walk out. And then everything that you did for the past year kind of felt like it got undermined. So I think I was just tired. I was looking for something that felt a little more tangible, like the impact I was having. I wanted it to be more tangible, and solar renewable energy felt very much that way. Like you could just directly, there still is legislation and regulations that get in the way of being able to do solar in various states, but it felt like the impact was more tangible. So yeah, that was the first I had really worked in solar. As far as working with tribes, I hadn't worked with tribes previously either. I had worked in doing air quality and diesel pollution, just kind of in the intersection of, environmental justice, and definitely knew through all my years of being in the industry that, pretty much all environmental harms disproportionately affect communities of color. And so was kind of working adjacent to these issues, but hadn't worked directly with tribes.
You touched on this when you were sort of initially talking about the nature of your work, but I want to come back a little bit to it, to just sort of talk about why solar energy seems to make so much sense and why is it why does it work so well in a way for the people that you work with? And in particular, I did want to mention, you mentioned this briefly, but maybe to talk about a little bit in a little bit more detail, this idea of community solar projects, which I think are quite different from what we typically see. We've all seen various houses in our neighborhood that have or in other neighborhoods that have installed panels on their roofs, and that's obviously a very small scale project for one residence. And then if you're driving on the highway, you'll see an enormous solar farm. And it sounds like what you're talking about is somewhere in between those things. So I'd love to know a little bit more about how that works and why those are so beneficial for the communities you're focusing on.
Yeah, I'll just dive a little bit deeper into what community solar means. So the typical residential solar system, there's a down payment of somewhere in the ballpark of $15,000, and then it pays off after that. We tend to not really work on residential systems just because not super cost effective if you're just doing it on, for one house or one family. And then, what you mentioned when you drive by on the highway, those are typically utility scale solar projects. Where we work is kind of in between, as you said, community scale projects. They can vary in size. We do, anywhere between 24 kilowatt projects to 3 megawatt projects. But community solar really is a model that's trying to create access to the benefits of solar for people who haven't historically had it, or who, for various reasons can't access those benefits. They might be renting, they might not be a homeowner. Maybe there's too much shading their roof. Maybe they don't have the education and awareness. They don't know, they don't have a relationship with their utility. They're not sure. There might not be incentive or rebate programs targeted towards those demographics to help them, encourage them to go solar. So the model really does create access by allowing, other people to kind of shoulder the burden of owning, maintaining, installing the system on a community building or in a public space. And then residential, individuals can subscribe. And like I said, then they'll be reaping the benefits. And I think, when we talk to community members, cost savings always are, is the number one reason why solar is appealing. Other than it being, a clean and renewable energy resource and adding renewables to the grid, I think, people tend to be supportive of those principles, but for them personally, the main thing that makes the difference is the cost savings and being able to point to, I'm saving, $230 on my electricity bill every year. So that's usually the most salient thing for our partners and for community members is the cost savings. We do think that including workforce development opportunities can also be beneficial just because there are barriers to, the solar and renewable energy industry is predominantly white and male dominated. And so there's still a lot of room for improvement in as far as diversifying the industry. And so we try to just create opportunities for people who might not have had those doors open for them before and being able to work in the trades. So there are, numerous benefits. And I think oftentimes, for communities, it's just a source of pride to be able to point to this asset now that's on their, whether they're on their school or on their community center, it's an asset and, can generate a lot of pride. And especially for tribes, can contribute towards energy independence and energy sovereignty. So numerous benefits.
So to sort of take a slightly higher level perspective now, it does seem like the work that you're doing lies kind of right at the intersection of two extremely big and complicated and difficult projects, or maybe three. I mean, there's a lot going on here. One of them, sort of the most obvious, is dependence on fossil fuels, and this is, by creating access to solar energy, you are helping your particular clients, but also sort of the country as a whole, reduce dependence on fossil fuels. But another thing that's playing in here is not only access of lower income communities to renewable energy, which has been a serious problem, as you've talked about, but also, there is a long and I think it's probably fair to say overall quite unhappy relationship between the United States and Native American tribes, Native American nations. And I guess I'm going to throw out sort of an open-ended question, which is to say, what are your, well, I do have actually a specific question, which is when you're working on particular projects, is there federal involvement? Certainly there's a lot of federal oversight of Native American tribes, and I wonder if there's any particular federal involvement. But also in a sort of a bigger picture sense, like how does, if at all, how does the history here relate to what you are trying to do now?
Yeah, big topic, big question. So to get to your first question, is there federal involvement? Yes, sometimes in the way of funding sources typically. So the Department of Energy has an Office of Indian Energy, and they release grant funds every year, specifically supporting tribal energy projects. So that's been a recurring funding source that we've applied for numerous times with different tribes. So there are federal funds, and we're on the brink of there likely being a lot more federal funds. Federal grant applications tend to be pretty lengthy, and honestly, sometimes that's too much for a tribe. Sometimes tribes don't have a designated staff capacity or someone working on energy projects to even be able to lead these projects, let alone put together an enormous federal grant application. So, there are good things and bad things. It's amazing that, those funds exist. Sometimes it can be onerous and burdensome for tribes. And so there are organizations like Grid Alternatives who have people specifically on staff, and their job is just to help tribes apply for federal grants. So that's the extent of federal involvement in the project that we work on. Can you repeat the way you phrased the second question?
Well, the second question is really just kind of the bigger one of does the history, and it's kind of an impossible question, so I'll try to be a little bit more specific, but sort of does the history of the kind of the fraught relationship between the United States and Native American nations play in? And one way I can imagine that it might is issues of trust, where here you are coming in from the outside and asking if you can sort of come into these communities and undertake a fairly substantial infrastructure project. So that might be one example where it plays in.
Definitely. There's a ton to unpack here. And, when I started in the work, I had never had any formal training or education in Native American politics, history, culture. So I'm taking a class right now through Portland State University, which, I think a lot of people in the professional world, there's a lot happening in Indian country, and there are a lot of people who are wanting to partner with tribes on projects of all different kinds. And a lot of those people, similar to myself, had never had any training or education, in these topics. So I think one thing that's kind of been just, a realization is that I never really learned in that much depth the extent of, the relationship between the federal government and tribes historically, and all the different eras of federal Indian policy, from, relocation, assimilation, termination, treaties, and the ways in which Congress, has failed to follow through on the promises in a lot of those treaties. And then, just knowing that since then, even, there are lots of organizations, businesses, companies who have approached tribes trying to partner, likely over-promising and under-delivering, and, saying, here's the silver bullet, here's this opportunity. And oftentimes those things haven't actually panned out. So there definitely is a lack of trust. But, we're also careful not to generalize, because, another big thing that I think sometimes people don't understand is that every tribe is different. There's 574 federally recognized tribes in the US. And then that's not even, the non-federally recognized ones. Every tribe, in terms of their governance structure, culture, is completely different. They're all sovereign nations, and tribal treaties on reservations are the supreme law of the land. So, they override state laws. So, all of this context definitely informs all the work we do with tribes. And it's, definitely just been a humbling experience, I think, to kind of learn how much we don't know. And so I think all of us doing this work are trying to do our best to kind of catch up. But, really, it comes down to trust building and relationship building, and that's at the core of all of our work. And a lot of times, it's just having conversations with people and actually showing up in person on the reservation and sharing meals together, and getting to know these people before you even talk about a potential project, or because otherwise the work can feel very transactional. And I think there are a lot of people out there who are like very aggressively trying to work with tribes, and feels more like a box checking thing, because they have equity goals or whatever. And so we try to kind of avoid those pitfalls. But yeah, to answer your question, I mean, definitely there's a lot of context and history that informs all of this, and I'm still learning a lot of it.
Have you personally spent a lot of time on reservations as you've been working on these kinds of projects?
I've been to several. I was on the Blackfeet Reservation for about a week this past summer during the installation of that project. And then a group of us were up on the Quinoa Indonesian reservation this past February. So yeah, typically during installations, but I had gone to the Blackfeet Reservation a year prior just to meet with everybody in person. I mean, especially during COVID, it's just important to show up if possible in person outside, to build trust and to show up face to face, and to kind of follow through and not just be engaging remotely. So yeah, and that's, I don't want to go too far down unrelated tangents, but it is a shocking contrast. I mean, the Blackfeet Reservation, for example, is immediately adjacent to Glacier National Park, which is, booming tourist economy, tons of resources. And then you drive, like 20 minutes and you're on an incredibly poor reservation with a stark lack of resources and economic opportunity, and just a lot of, it's shocking. Not, every reservation is different, but the Blackfeet has been on that land for, longer than any of the Glacier National Park economy was there, yet they don't benefit from any of the tourism industry that exists there.
You were talking a little bit earlier when talking about what you had done before you got to BEF, and that you were sort of working either in the environmental movement or sort of directly adjacent to the environmental movement, and it sounded like that it was somewhat frustrating. It wasn't what you wanted to do. I wonder whether you think the work that you're doing now, in terms of its economic impact, in terms of its focus on communities that have historically suffered from income inequality and how that spins into energy issues. Do you see any sort of bigger lessons that might be of use, or at least sort of thoughts that you might want to whisper in the ear of the larger environmental movement?
I mean, I think, we chatted about this before. I think a lot of us doing this work actually don't really, align ourselves with kind of the part of the environmental movement that's more focused on kind of like general climate advocacy. I mean, I spent a lot of time doing that type of work. But as we talked about, I think the work that we're doing is in some ways more focused on economic development and economic opportunity. And we aren't as focused on, promoting solar for the sake of, the non-reliance on fossil fuels. That's definitely still there, but it's more about just, decreasing the energy burden of communities. And, energy burden, as we define it, is the proportion of your income that you spend on energy costs. And so in that way, actually, I think solar and the work that we do is, it's a bipartisan issue. It's like, it doesn't have to be kind of aligned with what I think, some pitfalls I think of the broader environmental movement sometimes is just that like the extreme climate advocacy is actually, pushed away a lot of people across the aisle. And I think that we try to kind of present things in a way that is bipartisan, and that's really just about saving money and, creating workforce opportunities. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the desire to move away from fossil fuels and adding renewables to the grid, those benefits are all still there, but I actually was realizing recently that it's not actually kind of at the core of what we do, and it's not at the core of the conversations that we're having with partners, and that might not even be on the forefront of their mind. And the forefront of their mind is just saving money.
it's an interesting and sort of, I think, hopeful insight in that it obviously is something that will have a tremendous environmental benefit, but it also has an economic benefit. And so maybe that's something that we can look for. I am mindful that we should turn to some questions from our audience. So Morgan, if you want to throw out some questions, let's turn into that.
We do have some questions. People are excited to hear more about this. I do want to say before we turn to those, just if you tried to submit a question in chat and had an issue with the form, please go ahead and resubmit that. We've cleared that issue up, but we do have a handful of questions to start out with. First off, from one of our current students, what's your advice for students who want to gain exposure to these issues and this work?
Great question. I mean, I think you're doing the right thing, attending, learning from previous alumni, and kind of just, I feel like when I was in school, I didn't really have a good sense of the professional world and what the job opportunities might be. Even when I majored in environmental studies, I didn't know what career paths looked like. So I think, just having a lot of informational conversations with people working in different industries, different sectors, is a great way to just start learning what's out there, because it's the professional world is entirely different than being in academia, and so I think that's great that you're starting now. I mean, I think taking any kind of environmental courses, I didn't start taking environmental courses until like halfway through college, so I think naturally just let yourself wander a bit and take things, and you'll learn. It's just as helpful to learn what you are not interested in as learning what you are interested in. And so I think college is a great time for that. Kind of just exploring. But yeah, just remaining curious all the time. And most people in the professional world are more than happy to sit down and have a quick conversation, with a young professional or someone kind of just starting out in their career, interested to learn more. And most people are happy to share about the work that they do. So it's a good place to start.
And I'll just sort of chime in to just sort of put in a plug for the Commonwealth Liberal Arts Education. It does seem to me that your particular history is, sort of should sort of be an inspiration to folks who, maybe are worried that they don't know exactly what they want to do when they're a senior in high school or when they're somewhere in college. Like, as long as, exactly as you said, as long as you stay open and curious and work on the tools to assimilate new information as it comes at you in the professional world, you'll be okay. Who would have guessed that you'd be, delving into the details of solar technology, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So, there it is.
Not me.
All right, another question comes from an alumnus who works at a large renewable energy company. And he says, increasingly, we are finding that the state governments, which are our customers, want to include environmental justice and tribal input into the projects we build. Obviously, the work you do brings clean energy directly to tribes, but how can large utility scale projects engage with these communities too?
That's a great question, and it's definitely true that things are trending that way. A lot of organizations at every level are wanting to include tribal input, which is great. I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is just ensuring that whatever agency it is engaging with tribes that might be impacted by whatever project is being proposed. So, especially at the utility scale, usually larger swaths of land can often be, there's definitely a lot of utility scale solar projects that are considered on reservations, and just making sure that rather than only seeing, tribal lands as kind of economic opportunities for the benefit of other people, like just recognizing that that is their land and that they should be involved in the conversations from the beginning. I've seen a lot of like federal agencies, state level agencies kind of hold public comment periods, and they're about to release, grant program for that tribes might be eligible for, or, incentive programs for solar, and they want tribal input, but they don't really know how to go about getting tribal input. And so I think I see, people stumbling there a little bit of not really, it's probably best to build relationships with tribes way before the program is about to be announced. to gather input, and make sure that they're involved in the conversations from the beginning, I think, rather than like presenting them with a fully baked idea or plan that's going to impact them on their land. I mean, I think that's the main thing, is just there are a lot of people interested in developing on tribal reservations. And, that is a very contentious place to be. And I think that making sure that the due diligence is done first and that communication and trust is built first before moving forward with any of those plans.
It does seem to me that one could imagine it would not go particularly well for an entity like a large utility to sort of come with a plan and present it to a tribe and say, we would like to, undertake a large project on your land, and this is going to be very beneficial to you. And that is like the first communication that the utility has had with the tribe. That just seems to bring up the kinds of problems that have existed in this area for a long time and have generally gone poorly for the tribes.
Yeah, I mean, time and time again, and it's paternalistic, to kind of say that this will be good for you. Like, we don't know what's going to be good for them. It's up to them to decide what's going to be good for them. And they might have other things they would rather do with the land. So I think that that's also a lot of people in different industries kind of are sometimes like, what, why wouldn't they support this project? Like, it's going to be good. And it's like, that's just completely from your perspective. So I think just, really, and which a lot of that is like, also not taught anywhere. So you see a lot of professionals who like never, it's just relationship building, it's trust building, and it's kind of just like having the sensitivity in dealing with, potentially really harmful situations.
Another question that we have, one person says that they know you work on community scale projects, but they're interested in what individual everyday homeowners can do to pivot towards natural energy.
Yeah. Well, I think, if I don't know who exactly we're talking to, but if we're talking to, potential homeowners out there who are looking to go solar, I mean, there's other steps to take. Energy efficiency is a great place to start actually before considering solar, to make your home as energy efficient as possible. And then you'll actually probably need less solar once you've done those things. So, there are definitely organizations, depending on where you live, that do home energy audits, and that can, point you in the direction of different energy efficiency steps that you can take to improve your home that way. If you are at the point where, you're considering going solar yourself, just doing some research to figure out who the solar contractors and installers are in the area. Typically, there's kind of just a quick screening process that a lot of contractors do. They'll just kind of get the address of your house and look at the age of your roof membrane and the angle of the roof and the shading, and they can just drop a quick design, and you can get a sense of what that might cost and in how many years will you be able to pay it off. So depending on, I don't know exactly which audience we're talking to, but that's kind of, if you're a homeowner, a lot of utilities, even if you're not a homeowner, a lot of utilities have, kind of green energy, renewable energy programs within, for their customers, where I think probably a lot of you have already seen, you're getting this percentage of your electricity is coming from renewable energy sources. So there's some utilities. I think a great place to start is just figuring out who your utility is and doing some research. A lot of people don't even know, they just get a bill in the mail every month, and that's the extent of their knowledge of who their utility provider is. And so just learning more about how that works. And yeah.
We have a related question that I think will go along with that well, from someone who has had a salesperson knock on their door selling solar panels and talking about federal rebates that directly benefit homeowners. Are those programs worth exploring? Are they legitimate? Do you have any insight on something like that?
Yeah, I can't say for sure about this. I don't know which specific program, but there's a federal tax credit that's available. There are, there's a swath of federal and state level incentives and rebates for solar. So it depends on where you live. Again, to be considering solar, you would have to be a homeowner. But they're definitely, any type of incentive or rebate for solar is worth looking into. There are some solar contractors have specific programs, targeting low-income families, where, they are able to get funding from somewhere, and then that enables them to subsidize the cost of the system specifically for people below a certain income threshold. So it really just depends on, where you live, the state you live in, and the utility and the contractors around, but it's definitely all worth looking into.
Thank you. We have a couple different questions, and I know you addressed this a little bit, but maybe you have more information about how you go about finding community partners, and then more so how you build trust with them.
Yeah, so finding community partners, a lot of times it's just outreach. We have a list of tribes in the Pacific Northwest, which is kind of the region where we work. And sometimes it is actually just cold outreach, and you're trying to find a person who works maybe in the natural resources department or in energy, or for the housing authority, or just kind of trying to start a conversation somewhere with somebody. And then sometimes there are lots of conferences that happen surrounding tribal energy or around solar, so sometimes those are great ways to meet people. But a lot of it just comes from having conversations, doing a lot of outreach that we've done in the past. Sometimes people get referred to us through other nonprofits like Grid Alternatives. They've come to us several times with a tribal partner and they're looking for funding or support, so they'll come to us that way. And then as far as trust building, I think that's it's hard to, there's not necessarily a blueprint for that, but I think really trying to eliminate an agenda and kind of just show up and listen to what the communities that we're working with have to say, what their interests are as they pertain to energy, and really framing it as just, we're here to provide support and technical assistance if desired, and if not desired, it's completely fine, and not, we're not benefiting or profiting, from any of these projects. I think sometimes there is that skepticism of like, maybe BEF is here because they're trying to profit, or they're trying to be the owner of this project, or they're trying to like, be extractive in some way. And so I think just having to kind of like work against that a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of similar to the way you build trust with anybody else in life, just relationship building.
Thanks. Another question. This person says, I'm interested in how your projects have worked with the solar development community, in particular, financing partners that may have a very different view or approach to building projects.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple. So in terms of funding and financing partners, there are a lot of different types of partners that we work with. Sometimes it's philanthropic funders, or private foundations that are particularly interested in, giving grants to energy projects, tribal energy projects. Sometimes we work with loan providers who provide low interest loans to projects. Sometimes it's, big grant funds that were created through ballot measures, sometimes the state level incentives. And, again, not everyone has the same mission and priorities and values as we do. And so we're a team of 3 people. We can only do so many projects. We actually have to be pretty selective about what we work on. And typically the best projects happen when we're working with partners who do share our mission and our values. And so we tend to actually not, there's plenty of people who approach us who just want to do a solar project, but they're not really trying to prioritize delivering direct economic benefits to low-income communities or tribal communities or communities of color. And so they just kind of want to do solar and they want our help. And we do just have to be, we say no to a lot of projects because a lot of partners, whether it's on the finance and funding side or elsewhere, aren't necessarily in it for the real community benefit. So we are pretty selective in only working with people who also are trying to directly benefit communities through the projects.
I'm curious also, we touched a little bit on this earlier, but if there's more detail, I'd love to hear it about like how does the BEF fund itself? How do you sort of pay the bills? How do you acquire how do you sort of find your share of the funding of the projects that you work on?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's an important reason that I think BEF is different than the environmental nonprofits I worked for before. We were always scraping for every dollar and didn't have a lot of resources and didn't have any money to contribute towards projects. So Bonneville Environmental Foundation is affiliated with, but separate from Bonneville Power Administration, which is a federal agency that markets power to all of the consumer-owned utilities in their service territory in the Pacific Northwest. So BPA essentially kind of helped create BEF about 20 years ago with the goal of establishing a nonprofit arm or branch that could accomplish the clean energy goals that they had. So we get, our biggest funder is BPA. That then means that all the work that we do has to actually be in alignment with BPA's goals. And so we report to them quarterly on all of the work that we're doing, and it has to be, you know, in partnership with their utilities. So in that way, we're limited. We can't really spend a lot of money or resources outside of BPA's territory. But that's a big source of the funding that we're able to spend on projects. And then as an organization, we also are funded by a lot of other grants and, you know, philanthropic funders that fund our staff positions and things like that.
Morgan, do you have further questions?
I believe that is the last one we have. Do you have any parting wisdom, parting thoughts you didn't get to share?
I just wanted to ask a quick sort of a wrap-up question of Raphaela, which is just, you know, sort of looking into the future. It's always a risky business, but to the extent that you can, first of all, do you see yourself sticking around in this field or something like it for the next bunch of years? And you know, it was interesting to hear about you know how BEF's agenda works. Also, it is there any sort of 5 or 10 year goal for this general line of work, or do you see, you know, is there anything else you can say about where you think this all is going?
Yeah, I mean, myself, I definitely see myself and plan to stick around in this field for the foreseeable future. As an organization, you know, our goal is to always establish replicable and scalable models for projects. So those are always our goals in doing projects. That we're a team of 3 people, and you know, one of the major projects that I told you all about is a 24 kilowatt system. It's tiny. It's on 1 building, you know, and 1 reservation out of the 574 federally recognized tribes. So I think, you know, when you zoom out, we're kind of working in this like teeny corner, scratching the surface. But we're really trying to establish models for projects, financial models for projects, partnership models that are replicable and scalable. So, you know, we'd like to be able to do some of that, you know, and I think we foresee ourselves growing as the team as this work establishes itself, but also for other people elsewhere to be able to replicate these types of projects and to scale them to be larger. So there's, you know, enormous opportunity. Again, I feel like sometimes when I zoom out, it feels like we're just doing a teeny amount of work in this teeny corner over here. So I think that would be the goal. And, you know, our team has other goals as they pertain to the other technologies, you know, establishing renewable hydrogen as an emerging renewable technology. But for solar, definitely just trying to scale up and expand impact.
Great. Unless you have any final thoughts, or if there are any final questions, I think we can wrap it up precisely 4 minutes ahead of our scheduled time. So Raphaela, thank you so much for being here. Absolutely fascinating, exciting work. And you know, I know we all wish you all the best and all success in continuing to do what you've been doing. It's really great stuff.
Thank you all for me and for joining. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Raphaela. I'm going to put Raphaela's email from her slide in the chat if you had any questions that you didn't have answered. And one of the things that we do miss about these events in person is getting to chat with classmates and fellow families and community members. So if you saw someone on screen tonight that you'd like help getting back in touch with, shoot me an email. I'll include my email in this message as well, and I'll be happy to make that connection. We always love to see our community engaging, and it's great to see so many of you on here tonight. Thank you all, and I hope we will see you again soon.